Olga from Minerva. Today I'm bringing you a sew along for the Vogue 7975 sewing pattern, which is this cute jacket that I'm wearing today. This pattern features quite a bit of variation. All the views are lined and feature the high round neckline. However, there are two different jacket lengths as well as two different sleeve lengths. You have a full length sleeve as well as a quarter length sleeve. There are options for a mock welt pocket as well as a patch pocket. We also have a couple of options for closures. You can either have the buttons as I did here, or you can use a ribbon tie at the top. And there's also a wide variation of decoration and different applique that you can do for this pattern. With all of that, this pattern really allows you to mix and match to create the perfect jacket for any occasion. The fit of the jacket is lovely too, which really adds to the classical and timeless design of it. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make view D. This pattern is labeled as easy, and I would recommend this for confident beginners and maybe intermediate sewists who would like to dip their toes into jacket making or coat making. I think it's a really easy jacket pattern. If you have made any garment before, I think this would be a really good challenge for a confident beginner and a really easy make for a more intermediate and advanced sewist. The sizing for this pattern ranges from sizes 6 to 22. However, be sure that you are picking the size range that you need from the drop-down menu on our website when you're purchasing the pattern. You can actually check the back of the envelope on our website to have a look at the finished measurements of the garment so you know what size to pick for the measurements that you will be making this jacket for. The fabric suggestions for this pattern are wool, wool blends, tweeds, boucle, gabardine, and medium weight linens. So you have quite a lot of variation in the fabrics that you can use for this pattern too, which again adds to its versatility. So let me show you what fabrics and notions I will be using to make up this version. For our main fabric, I'm going to be using our Minerva Core range luxury cashmere wool coating fabric in the color chocolate brown. This is a non-stretch woven fabric with a width of 150 centimeters or 59.1 inches. It is a heavyweight fabric composed of 65% wool, 20% cashmere, and 15% nylon. This means it's a very warm and soft fabric, perfect for coats and jackets to keep you cozy and stylish in colder weather. It comes in a range of colors, so make sure you have a look on our website for your favorite. For the lining, I'm using our Minerva Core range woven jacquard lining in the color brown. This is a non-stretch woven fabric with a width of 142.5 centimeters or 56.1 inches. It's a lightweight fabric composed of 100% polyester. The jacquard weave makes it a little less slippery than usual lining fabrics, which makes it much easier to work with and adds a beautiful detail to any jacket or coat. It comes in a big variety of colors, so you can choose to coordinate or contrast with your main fabric. For interfacing, I'm using the Vilene Vliazoline medium fusible interfacing in white to help add a little structure to a few of the pieces we'll be working with. For buttons, I chose the hemline plain round buttons in gold. These measure 2.1 centimeters or 0.8 inches and we'll be using 5 buttons in total. The gold will definitely pop against the brown fabric. For thread, I'll be using the trusty Gutermann Sew All polyester sewing thread in the color 780, but if you choose a different color of fabric, you can take advantage of our thread matching service. As we're going to be working with wool, I would recommend that you change your sewing machine needle to a size 90, but if that's not possible for you, make sure that you're using a brand new sewing machine needle so that it will be nice and sharp and give you the best sewing experience for this heavier weight fabric. All of these items are going to be listed below as always so that you have everything you need to sew along with me. And remember to save this video so that you can sew along at your own pace. After folding the fabric with right sides together and placing all the pattern pieces on it, we can go ahead and cut them out of the fabric. When all the pieces have been cut, it's time to transfer the markings of the pattern onto the fabric. Wool is not an easy fabric to mark as most pens don't show up on it and chalk rubs off very easily, so I would recommend you cut the notches out of the seam allowance and use stitch marking or tailor's tacks for all the other markings. Both these methods consist of using basting threads to transfer the pattern markings so you can clearly see them throughout the sewing process and then easily remove them once you no longer need them. Then we have to repeat those steps for our lining as well. Make sure you double check your pattern pieces, as not all of them will be cut from both the lining and fashion fabric. We also need to cut out the interfacing pieces and apply them to their respective fabric pieces. For view D, we'll be interfacing pieces number 8, 11, and 12. To apply this interfacing, use the iron on medium heat for 8 to 12 seconds, or check the manufacturer's instructions. Our first step is going to be stay stitching the side edge of the front pieces above the waist. Stay stitching is a technique where you sew a straight stitch through a single layer of fabric. It is most often used around curves to prevent distortion. This is because the curve cuts across the bias, which is the stretchiest part of the fabric. Using this technique on our princess seams will prevent them from getting stretched out of shape. Next, we're going to pin the uninterfaced front and side front together at the side front edge, matching the notches and clipping if necessary. The interfaced front pieces are going to be used for the facings. Then we can stitch that in place and finally clip the curved seam allowances and press them open. To prepare the welts, we're going to fold it along the fold line with right sides together, making sure to match the markings, and then stitch the ends. Then we'll trim the seam allowances and clip the corners before turning them right side out and pressing them, and then finally we're going to baste the raw edges together. We can then pin the welt to each front section, placing the seam line along the lower stitching line marked on the fabric and matching the symbols. Next, we'll stitch that in place and trim the seam allowances close to the stitching. This wool doesn't fray, so we don't really need to worry about finishing this seam. Then we can turn the welt upward, matching the circles, and edge stitch the ends of the welt in place. You could also do this by hand if you wanted an invisible finish. Now we can move on to stay stitching the side edges of the back piece above the waistline, just like we did for the front. Next, we'll pin the side back to the back pieces along the side edges with right sides together, making sure to match the notches and clipping if necessary. We can then stitch that in place and clip the curves before pressing the seam allowances open. With right sides together, we'll pin the front and back together at the shoulders and sides, making sure to match the seams and the notches. And then we'll stitch that in place, clip any curves, and press the seam allowances open. Moving on to the sleeves, we're going to start by ease stitching the back edge of the upper sleeve pieces between those markings. To ease stitch, use the longest stitch length on your sewing machine and do a couple of rows of stitching in the seam allowance without back stitching. Next, we can pin the undersleeve to the upper sleeve with right sides together, matching the double notches. Here we'll use the ease stitches we just made to help us adjust the ease. To do that, you just pull on those stitches gently until your sleeve pieces are the same length or the circle markings match up. Then you can distribute that fullness to avoid any tucks and pin it all in place. Then we'll stitch those seams and press them open. To close up the sleeve, we'll stitch the remaining seam, matching the notches, and press the seam allowances open. Then we can go ahead and ease stitch the cap of the sleeves between the small circles. Before we set the sleeves in, we're going to turn up a 1.5 inch or 3.2 centimeter hem on the lower edges of the sleeves, and we're going to hand sew them in place. The pattern suggests that we finish this raw edge, but like I mentioned before, this wool doesn't fray and this seam will be hidden behind the lining, so we can just go ahead and skip that step. Finally, with right sides together, we're going to pin the sleeve into the armhole, matching the markings and notches. In order to do that, we're going to have to ease the fullness of the sleeve by using our ease stitches again. When we're happy with the placement of the sleeve, we'll just stitch that in place and press. Moving on to the lining, we'll start by pinning the front facing to the side front lining with right sides together along the side edge, matching the notches. We're going to stitch that in place to within 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters of the lower edge. Then we're going to clip the seam allowances and press them open. To make the pleat in the back of the lining, we're going to pin the side edges together. Then using our markings or the pattern, pin the center back pleat lines together at those markings. Then we can stitch it down along the stitching line from the upper edge to the first marking, then between the small circles at the center, and from the lower small circles to the lower edge. After pressing the pleat to one side, we'll go ahead and baste the upper and lower edges. Next, we can pin the back lining to the lower edge of the back neck facing and stitch that in place before pressing the seam allowances downward. Then we have to stay stitch the side edges of this back lining piece until the waistline. After that, we can pin the side back to the back lining pieces with right sides together, matching the notches and clipping if necessary. Then we stitch those seams before clipping the seam allowances and pressing them open. Just like we did for the jacket, we'll now stitch the front and back lining with right sides together at the shoulders and sides, matching the seams and notches, and then press the seam allowances open. For the lining sleeves, we just repeat the exact same steps we did for the jacket sleeves, including setting them into the lining jacket. When our lining is all put together, we'll pin it to the jacket with right sides together along the neckline and the front edges, matching all the seams, notches, and markings. Then we can stitch that in place, pivoting at the corners, and then press all of the seam allowances toward the lining as best as we can. Next, we'll have to understitch the facing as far as possible. Understitching is a line of stitches that are sewn close to the edge of a facing or lining to keep it firmly on the inside of a garment without any stitches showing on the outside. To understitch, we press the seam allowance to the side of the facing, then stitch the seam allowances to the facings. Then we're going to stitch the facing to the jacket about 1.5 inches or 3.8 centimeters from the lower edge with right sides together, ending at the opening we left between the facing and the lining. After we trim that down, we can turn the jacket right side out and give it a good press. Now we can fold up the hem of the jacket along the stitching of the facing and sew it down by hand, easing any fullness if necessary, and also tack down the facings to the hem. Then we fold up the seam allowance of the lining and sew it by hand about 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters above the raw edge of the hem of the jacket. A pleat may form at the lower edge, but this will be for wearing ease. And we can't forget to also sew the remainder of the lining to the front facing by hand as well. Next, we have to pull the sleeve lining through the jacket sleeve and turn under the seam allowance on the lower edge of the sleeve lining. We'll slip stitch that 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters over the raw edge of the sleeve hem. Again, there will be a pleat here for wearing ease. Using the guide for buttonholes provided by the pattern, we'll place that along the right front, matching the edges of the tissue to the edges of the jacket and transfer the markings. We can then make the buttonholes where we marked them and cut them open. Finally, we'll lap the right front over the left, matching the centers, and use our buttonholes to mark the placement of the buttons, then stitch them down by hand. I'm really pleased with how this jacket turned out. It was super easy to put together. As for how this wears, it's super warm and comfortable. It's really soft. It has such a retro charm to it, which, as you know, I am a big fan of. All of the princess seams make it really flattering, which again really brings to mind that classic like Chanel jacket from the 50s and 60s. So I think this is a really good pattern if you were looking to replicate those. The cashmere wool suiting was an absolute dream to work with. It's so soft, so easy to work with, so easy to sew, really easy to press. If you do end up making your own version of this jacket, I would love to see it. So please make sure you are tagging us when you post your version of it. In order to do that, you can create a free account on our website, and then you can post photos and videos of your makes or your works in progress and share them with the community. It's a great place to meet like-minded people, fellow sewists from all over the world, and just, find some sewing inspiration. So that is everything from me for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!